Archbishop Dr. Dominiquae Bierman has traveled the world for over 3 decades, proclaiming the gospel made in Zion to the nations. She exposes the false doctrines of replacement theology and preaches restoration to the Jewish roots. Now join Archbishop Dominiquae in the latest Bible School on Wheels, exploring the entire land of Israel.
Welcome to one of the most interesting and exciting synagogues, ancient synagogues that have been unearthed here in the land of Israel. In fact, it has been restored. All these stones that you see around you are numbered, and they have a little number or a little name or a letter, so that they could reconstitute the synagogue from the ruins of how they found it. And they put the stones exactly where they were supposed to be according to the order how they were found after the earthquake. There was an earthquake here in 700s, in the 8th century, that brought down a few places. One of them is Beit Shean, that's in the Jordan Valley, one of the 10 Greek cities that was brought down completely, and it's an amazing archaeological site today. And of course also other constructions, especially on the Golan Heights, were brought down by that particular earthquake during the 8th century. In this case, they just simply reconstructed it back again the way that it used to be, and they did a superb job right here. We do not know what the synagogue was called, and we only know that the whole site here is called El Kanatir, which means the mother of the arches, because of the special factory of linen making for priesthood that had arches protecting the water passage. And here we're sitting in a very interesting construction that you can see that is different than anything you've seen before, even those that have been with us on tour before, and I've taken you to ancient synagogues. Have you ever seen an arch like this? You've never seen an arch like this? This is basically the arch that was right before the Torah. The Torah was inside here. Normally, the whole construction, the whole Ark of the Torah, which represents the Ark of the Covenant that used to be in the temple, used to be made out of wood. But in this case, we see it made out of stone. This is absolutely outstanding, and therefore it has survived the times. And we can have it today. There's a lot of symbols in this arch itself here. And some of the symbols that you can see, let's see if you follow me there, and you can see that there are like 2 eagles, one on each side. And you see also on both sides, you can see a menorah. And next to the menorah on one side, you see a shovel. And on the other side, you see a shofar. Well, the menorah, of course, used to be in the holy place, in the temple, the 7-branch candelabra. And the shovel was, this particular shovel is like the shovel that used to be also in the Beit Mikdash, in the sanctuary, in the holy temple, that was used to shovel the hot coals or even the ashes after the Holocaust or the burnt offerings, for example, or when they used to also feed the fire on the altar. And then on the other side, you can see a shofar. This long thing there that you can see there is a shofar. Again, a shofar being par excellence a temple instrument. In other words, the shofars used to be blown in the temple at all times for different reasons. Not only during the Feast of Trumpets, Yom Teruah, Rosh Hashanah, but also at other times to call the assembly together or to proclaim the new moon, for example, the Rosh Chodesh. The shofar was blown every month when 2 witnesses would give testification that the Rosh Chodesh has arrived. So I had the shofar there. But from the inside, we can also see grapes and fig leaves, of course, representing the 7 fruits of the promised land. And the 7 fruits of the promised land is what? Pomegranate, wheat, barley, what else? Olives, grapes, olives, dates, because when it talks about honey, it's normally honey from the dates, and then of course figs as well.
This tour is a Bible on Wheel tour. We travel north, south, east, west of Israel. We come to Jerusalem and we worship the real God of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob in this land. Archbishop and the rabbi of this tour, they make their own sacrifice and own impactful lesson for us to learn, especially we are the Gentiles from all the nations. I myself is from Malaysia, and I learned this and I need to bring it back to my own land, because it's the 2,000 years old ancient path that is missing in our nations. I encourage you, come and join us next year in Jerusalem, and it will impact you again also.
And now back to Bible School on Wheels with Archbishop Dominiquae Bierman.
Now, as I'm sitting here, I'm thinking about the importance of the Golan Heights. We are in the Golan. And in the Golan, that's been so contested by our enemies, saying that this Golan should be given over to Syria. Again, that's how they say, given over to Syria again. We're going to study this thing biblically, and we're going to study this thing also historically. So first, I want to tell you that the area of the Golan is mentioned in the Bible as a city of refuge. And we're going to read the scriptures of that city of refuge in a moment. And the same word for Golan was also Bashan, because the Golan was in what was called the Bashan area, or what you would say Bashan. You may remember there was a king called Og, the king of Bashan. This guy was a big guy. He was one giant. And you may remember that the people of Israel fought against Og, and in fact Adonai Yahweh gave them the land of Bashan on top of the inheritance in the land of Canaan. I would call the land of Bashan, or the Golan, the cherry on the pie. I would call it the reward. I would call it, when you go to Ephesians 3:19 and it says that he can give us exceedingly abundantly above all that we may ask or think, according to the power works within us. In other words, the Golan was an extra something for the people of Israel. But this extra something was just like when you have a cake and you don't have the cream, and you're missing the cream on the cake. This is the cream on the cake. Right here. This is the cream in the promised land, in the land, but it doesn't belong to the land of Canaan per se, but rather to the land of Bashan. And again, the name Bashan and Golan are intertwined in the Bible. So when we talk about the Golan Heights, we are dealing with the land of Bashan. We are also dealing with another name that you will remember from the scriptures, and it's Gilead. Anybody remembers when it says, is there any balm in Gilead? Well, there was a tree, it was a poplar tree, not far away from here, that used to give a special salve that became that balm of Gilead that would heal untold amount of woes and diseases and problems. So when the Bible talks about things like a balm in Gilead or the cows of Bashan, it's not something abstract, it's something real. There were cows in Bashan, and they were grazing, and they were, of course, a very, very well-fed cows in this area. And there was a poplar tree that gave the balm of Gilead. Now, when, therefore, we talk about Golan, we talk about a place of refuge, cities of refuge. And it says in Deuteronomy 4:41 to 43. Then Moses set apart 3 cities beyond the Jordan toward the east. There the manslayer might flee who kills his neighbor unintentionally and did not hate him previously. He may flee to one of the cities and live. Bezer in the wilderness on the plateau for the Reubenites, Ramoth in the Gilad, remember the Gilead again, for the Gadites, and Golan in the Bashan for the Menashites. So here we see that this area of both Bashan and Gilad was given to the tribe of Gad and to half of the tribe of Manasseh. So when we're talking about does the Golan really belong to Israel or doesn't it belong to Israel, we need to go to the oldest sources where we can find historical proof. Where did it belong to? Did it really belong to Syria, to Hafez al-Assad, or to the Palestinians, or even to the Druzes that are today on the Golan Heights? Because there's Druzes here that are not Muslims, but they came out of Islam and they built their own religion. Or is it really the inheritance of the people of Israel? Now, we may remember a time when after the Israelites conquered the land of Bashan from this big guy Og, the king of Bashan, this giant. And when they actually destroyed them completely and they had a smashing victory in this area, then they come to Joshua and they tell him, Joshua, please, this is the tribe of Reuben, the tribe of Gad, and half of the tribe of Manasseh. And they said, Joshua, please, give us this land so that we can settle here. Well, when they asked for this land that was on the other side of the Jordan, not in the west side of the Jordan, which was not technically the promised land yet, then Joshua said, what are you asking me to do? Are you going to now be building up an altar of idolatry in this area, and we will incur in the judgment of Yahweh? Don't you remember the golden calf? Don't you remember that we cannot do anything, not worship God, but in the promised land? And the people of the 2.5 tribes said, no, God forbid, Yah forbid. We are not going to build an altar here for the purpose of worshiping other gods. We just want to settle here, but we will worship the God of Israel. Second thing that Joshua said after he understood that they really meant well, and they just wanted to take possession of a land that Yahweh had actually already given through battle, through war, then Joshua said, okay, but I have one condition. And the condition is that you will first go to the other side, to the west part, and that you will help the other 10 tribes or 9.5 tribes to go ahead and conquer the land of promise. If you come and you help your brothers, then you can leave your women here, you can leave your children here, you can leave your cattle here, but the men of war have to cross and they have to go and help the other brethren, and when they come to their possession, then you can go back and join your wives, join your children, and join your cattle and your herds and settle in that side, which is the Bashan area, the Golan area, the Gilead area. Okay, this is what we are talking about. We are on the south side of it right now. And they did so. They went with all the tribes of Israel, and when Adonai gave a respite of the war, then they came back and they settled the 2.5 tribes on the other side. So all the area of Gilead, by the way, even portions of Jordan of today, the area of Gilead I'm talking about is already in the side of Jordan of today. And I want you to remember that was given to the 2.5 tribes. Now, there's a lot to learn from this story. Of course, the mere fact that Joshua said, okay, that's fine, you can get blessed, but not before your other brethren are blessed. See, many times we think that we are going to be blessed alone, and who cares about anybody else? But I'm going to tell you something. Yahweh looks at us as a community. He looks at his people, as a nation. And even the grafted in people of YHVH, those Jews and Gentiles that have become the one new man. We are a nation, you understand that? We are a called out nation made out of many nations that are representing the sheep nations to come. However, many times we think, oh, I'm going to get blessed, and who cares about anybody else? But we can see in the scriptures that there is a principle, and it keeps on repeating itself. And in fact, we're going to see that principle again repeated in the book of Joshua before they crossed the Jordan River. So, going back to Joshua 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, when they crossed the Jordan, then Joshua says to the Levites, you are going to cross first, step on the water, and you're going to stay there until all of Israel had crossed on dry ground. In other words, he didn't tell the Levites, or the ministers, right? Go and get blessed yourself in the promised land, and who cares how they cross? But the principle was, go and stand in the gap. Can you say with me, stand in the gap? Go and stand in the gap until the rest of the tribes are going to cross, so that all of Israel can cross on dry ground. And you can see the same principle here when Joshua is requested to give them this land. He says, okay, that's fine. You can get blessed. You chose this land, fine. However, you cannot get blessed before your brethren are blessed. You have to cross with them. You have to help them fight and have this community thing going, and then you can come back and enjoy it. Beloved, it's very important that we carry this, because you remember Cain when he killed Abel in Genesis chapter 4? And when Elohim comes to Cain and he says, Cain, where is your brother Abel? And he says, his blood is crying to me from the ground. And what did Cain say? Am I my brother's keeper? I'm not my brother's keeper. Who cares? Abel is Abel. I'm Cain. I don't care about them. Well, beloved ones, but that is not the heart of Yah. The heart of Yah is that we do care about our brethren. I'm going to tell you that the heart of Cain has been in the church for a long time. The heart of Cain that says, oh, well, those Jews rejected Christ, who cares? We are the Christians, and we are the new Israel, and we're going to get saved, and we're going to get raptured, and who cares about Israel? That heart of Cain. Instead of standing in the gap like priests all these years, or instead of doing what the tribes of the 2.5 tribes did, crossing over and fighting with Israel until Israel is restored, they said, who cares? Oh, they've been exiled, they've been punished, YHVH has punished them, we don't have anything to do with them. You see that heart, but that's not the heart of Yah. When we come into the end-time move of Yah, I believe we need to learn from the 2.5 tribes here.
United Nations for Israel is an entity that has been set by God Almighty. It's very scriptural. There are 2 organizations that are in place, the United Nations and the United Nations for Israel. United Nations for Israel stands for the things of God. And we have seen every agenda that the United Nations has is against the Word of God. The United Nations for Israel, for which I stand for, is a structure that Almighty God has put so that the government of God, the character of God can be established. I've come here for a purpose, that when I go back, I will coordinate efforts for the United Nations for Israel in my country, so that our country can follow up as a sheep nation behind Israel.
And now back to Bible School on Wheels with Archbishop Dominiquae Bierman.
We need to learn from the 2.5 tribes that were said, okay, yes, you can have this inheritance away from the promised land. Yes, you can be blessed in your nations, because you see, Golan also comes from the word Gol or Galut, which means exile. Like being outside of the land of promise. And so, yes, you can be blessed in exile. You can be blessed outside there in your nations. You can be blessed in Papua New Guinea. You can be blessed in Malaysia. You can be blessed in USA. You can be blessed in Mexico. You can be blessed in every nation that's represented in this place. You can be blessed. However, not before you make sure that all of Israel is restored. Now, this is a very important issue here, because I was visited during the second war with Lebanon. It was August of 2006. And I was visited right here at the Golan Heights, not in this place, but in a place called the Mount Bental, where there are bunkers from the time when Syria used to possess this area. And just for you to understand something, Syria only had the Golan Heights for 44 years, 1923 to 1967. In fact, the League of Nations, they came up with a plan for the division of the then called Palestine. And those that lived in Palestine then, which was the name the Romans called this area, in the name of the Philistines, the arch enemies of Israel, when they called this area Palestine, in 1922, the League of Nations, remember we are dealing with after the First World War, the League of Nations came up with a plan of dividing Palestine that included Jordan of today. Dividing Palestine and giving the Golan Heights to the people of Israel, to the Jewish people. That was 1922. Not only that, but even earlier than that, in 1917, before the time that the British mandate started here, there was a declaration made by the British Crown called the Balfour Declaration. And it was that if they would win the war, the First World War, then they would establish a Jewish national home here in the then called Palestine, which included most of Jordan of today. And they indeed won the war, and they won the war because our first president, well, he became our first president then, afterwards in 1948, but he was Professor Chaim Weizmann. And Professor Chaim Weizmann was a British Jew, and he invented the formula for explosive made out of acetone. And therefore, he helped the war effort of Great Britain to win the war. And when they won the war, they said that the Crown is looking favorably at establishing a Jewish national home in what was called Palestine then, which was regarded as the Promised Land, that included large portions of Jordan today, which included everywhere the 2.5 tribes also were established at the time of the conquest of the land of Israel. Today we have lost, because of the United Nations and because of what the nations implemented afterwards, 70% of that promise is actually found in the area of Jordan. We are only maybe established only 30% of what we should be establishing in the original promise of Balfour Declaration. But let's go back there, 1922. In 1922, the League of Nations decided to give us the Golan Heights. But in 1923, the then French occupation, or the French Empire that was ruling over this area, decided not to obey the League of Nations and gave the Golan Heights to Syria. So from 1923, it was usurped from the promise made to us by the League of Nations in 1922. In 1923, it was usurped, and it was given to the Syrians. And when the whole time of the British mandate and even the French mandate and all the conquest of Europe ended here, then from then on it was given over to Syria itself, and Syria ruled here. What did Syria do when it ruled here? It actually made it an area that would be unconquerable. So they made it a war zone already in case we would want it, as it was promised to us. Then there were bunkers and many, many roads for tanks and bunkers and other things so that they could fight us from here. And imagine that from this area, they were looking down over the basin of the Kinneret, the Sea of Galilee, and therefore we had these people that are, unfortunately, they are mostly pretty murderers. And they were looking down at us over there, being able to actually terrorize every Jewish settlement down below. It was very, very fearsome and difficult to even live in the upper Galilee, or even in the Galilee near the Kinneret at that time. Extremely difficult. There were already settlements, small settlements, so kibbutzim, moshavim, that were beginning to establish, especially moshavim, they were beginning to be established in this area, but it was absolutely a sacrifice to establish any agriculture here because of the snipers and because of what was happening up here by the Syrians. That was 1923. Until 1967, this area terrorized us. But in 1967, the Six-Day War, the miracle Six-Day War, where we were attacked by all the Arab nations around us, and we, little Israel, a nation of Shoah survivors, Holocaust survivors, that had no money for mega weaponry, and yet in 6 days, we managed, in fact in 6 minutes, because we destroyed the entire fleet of Egyptian air right there in the Sinai area, but then we ended up also taking all of the Golan Heights. And so we ended after the 6-day war with all of the Golan Heights that were promised to us in 1922, but it was 44 years later. You know, Elohim is a God of justice. He knew that it was promised to us. He knew that it was an unjust situation that the French gave it to the Syrians. You see, everything you're going to see in the nations is going to connect with what I've told you about the key of Abraham. I will bless those who bless Israel, and I will curse those who curse Israel. And you know, sometimes there is a time when justice is being executed. Whatever you sow, you are going to reap. France is reaping right now that they gave the Golan Heights to Syria.
This message by Archbishop Dominiquae Bierman will continue in the next Bible School on Wheels.
I have read The Sheep Nation as written by Archbishop Dominiquae when I was studying at my GRM. There is a chapter called Key of Abraham. When I'm praying for Hong Kong, I use this Key of Abraham to pray for Hong Kong protests. In addition, I also pray for the church, for Teshuvah, as judgment is coming. And this book I strongly recommend. When Matthew 25 said, the nations will be divided into sheep nation and goat nations. I strongly recommend to read this book.
If you enjoyed today's program, we'd love to hear from you. Please send your comments, requests, or donations to kad-esh.org or mail to Kad-Esh MAP Ministries, 52 Tuscan Way, Suite 202-412, St. Augustine, Florida, 32092, USA. Have a blessed week and join us again for the next Bible School on Wheels. Shalom.